การสู้รบกับกลุ่ม IS และการรับมือกับการก่อการร้ายดูเหมือนจะเป็นปรากฏการณ์ที่กำลังเกิดขึ้นโดยเฉพาะในกลุ่มชาติตะวันตกที่กำลังจัดตั้งพันธมิตรเพื่อที่จะต่อสู้กับกลุ่ม IS ในซีเรียนะคะพร้อมๆกับการคาดการณ์ว่ากำลังจะนำไปสู่สงครามโลกครั้งที่ 3 หรือไม่ปัญหาเรื่องผู้ลี้ภัยผู้อพยพที่จะข้ามไปมาระหว่างพรมแดนจะถูกกระทบอย่างไรและปัญหาที่กำลังเกิดขึ้นสืบเนื่องจากการโจมตีที่กรุงปารีสกำลังส่งผลอะไรต่อความมั่นคงโดยเฉพาะในระดับโลกและระดับภูมิภาคอย่างเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้วันนี้ดิฉันจะคุยกับหนึ่งในที่ปรึกษาคณะกรรมาธิการยุโรปที่ดูแลเรื่องความมั่นคงการควบคุมพรมแดนและการรับมือกับการก่อการร้ายนะคะเป็นหนึ่งในที่ปรึกษาที่ให้คำแนะนำต่อสหภาพยุโรปมาแล้วไม่ต่ำกว่า 8 ปีค่ะก็คือคุณเทอเรนซ์ซูลิแวนค่ะ Thank you Mr. Sullivan for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Do you predict in your role as advisor, one of the advisors to EU, that the Third World War is now coming, beginning of the Third World War?
I've heard this mentioned many times recently, and I'm not sure who the Third World War will be with. If you're saying it's the whole world versus ISIS, maybe. But ISIS have a lot of backers in the Arabic world, a lot of financiers in the Arabic world. And some countries, like Russia and America, have bases in the Arabic world. And they are not happy to destroy that country because they're backing ISIS, because they'll lose their base. Both of them would. So they would be like a school teacher. He'll come in and say, don't do that again. Don't touch that.
So can we say that actually the war has actually going on in the region?
A war's been going on in that region for 10 years or more. And the problem is, if you bomb a country and you destroy its infrastructure, its government, its civil service, its military and its police force, it ceases to be a country. And then what happens is the strongest survive. So you get groups of very strong power men who have money or have tribal affiliations, can raise people, and they become heads of their own little parts of the country. What ISIS has done is, on the back of religion, have harnessed those and said, oh, you are Sunnis and you run this area. We want to make all this Sunni. We want to have it back like it used to be under the Sultan. We want the 4 flags back, because it would be 4 flags, 4 Muslim flags. Green Saudi Arabia, red for Turkey, then there was the black, and then there was the white. They want all of them back under one control, which they call the Islamic State, ISIS, okay? Or Daesh as the Arabs call it. And these people say, that's a good idea. So they say, now you're part of us. So where you had individual warlords, they've all said, well, no, we're ISIS now. So now you have an area which is on the map, covered in pink, and said that's ISIS control.
So you mean even the forming of ISIS is not very tight, it's not unity forming of coalition of IS. It's having different warlords to support it?
It is very similar to different warlords, except there's a religious part of it. There's a imam inside Iraq who may have probably left now, is inside Syria. It's very hard to track these people. He demands allegiance. So these warlords would give allegiance, religious allegiance, to him as their religious leader. So now they have these warlords who would normally fight each other for power, fighting with ISIS, because they believe they're part of ISIS, under the banner of this imam.
But do you see the latest tension between Turkey and Russia? Does it mean that the conflict, the battleground, going to be expansive, not only excluded inside Middle East, but will be dragging Russia into this fighting?
Forget about Russia plane incursion into Turkish airspace, whether it happened or didn't happen. Forget about that. All right? The issue is, why did the Turks shoot the plane down? Where previous days there have been Russian planes flying across the border all the time. And in the
At
previous
least for
week,
2 months.
for months, it's gone on. sometimes for 10 minutes. This was 15 seconds. So why did the Turks shoot down the plane? Okay? There's a number of reasons. The Turks feel safe inside NATO because they're NATO members. So they feel that when they do something, they're talking with America, they're talking as if they was America, UK, and the whole of Europe.
They will have strong backup.
Yes, right, so they feel safe. Second is there's a group of Turks who live on the border, in the border and outside the border called Turkomen. Okay? And the Russians saw Turkomen as a threat to the government inside Syria. Thirdly, I don't believe they recognised it was a Russian plane because the Syrians buy Russian equipment and the Syrians fly Su-24s. And they've already shot down one Syrian plane already, Su-24. So I don't believe the government of Turkey issued the shoot it down. I don't think the High Command issued it to shoot down. I believe the local commander at the low end saw a Su-24 and made the assumption, not another one. We shot one down already. Let's shoot another one down. And I think it was after that occurred, they suddenly realised, because the first issue from the Turkish government was, we've shot down a Russian-made jet. I never said we shot a Russian plane there. They said we shot down a Russian-made jet. What leads me to believe that they did not realise it was a Russian plane.
You consider it was a mistake on the ground of Turkish military?
It's happened before, when the Russians shot down the passenger plane from South Korea, that flew over the missile base near Japan. It wasn't the Russian government who shot it down, it was the local commander did it. He made the assumption that it was a bomber and shot it down, didn't even check it. Right? Now, that commander disappeared after that occurred. I feel sure that the commander in Turkey is also disappeared. I think he's no longer at his post.
What do you project going to happen after
Well,
this?
there's a war of words. First comes the war of words. And that will be, it's your fault, it's your fault, it was your fault, it was your fault, apologise. No, I'm apologising, you apologise for flying. No, you apologise for down. It's going to be a war of words. Then it'll be sanctions. I'm not buying anything from you anymore. I'm not even going to talk to you anymore until you apologise. And they will come, well, we don't need your, we can say our stuff elsewhere. I'm not apologising. That's the first, right? And then when that calms down and both peoples goes into the background mind, then they will get together and they will sort it out. They will sort out what is known as rules of engagement. They've already sorted out rules of engagement with the Americans, so American planes don't shoot down Russian planes and Russian planes don't shoot down American planes, okay? And they told the Americans that they were flying on the border with the assumption that America would have told Turkey there's Russian planes flying on your border. Well, I don't believe the Americans told the Turks. I think they left it to the Turks to find out themselves.
But in the long term, what do you see going to happen after the attempt that they have to form up grand coalition among the US, UK, France and Russia to fight against IS?
Putin is an interesting man. But he has a yearning to be an international player. He wants to be inside the fold of international players, and he hasn't been. He's always been kept outside by the Americans and the Europeans on the periphery. With him joining the Americans in a coalition allows him to exert more power in his region. And for him it's good to exert that power. So for Putin, I believe he has justification in as much as 129 Frenchmen and other people died in Paris. We lost 240 people when ISIS put a bomb on the plane from Ankara. So he has, and no one from the West went to Russia and said that's terrible and laid wreaths and had a Russian day like they did in Europe and had football matches with armbands and all singing the French songs. No one did that for the Russians, but they did it for the French. So he feels a bit, So he has to show his people, just as President Hollande has to show his people, that they won't stand for external attacks. So they have to, whether it's useful or non-useful, they have to bomb. Bomb. The only excuse they have is to bomb. The other thing they can do is put feet on the streets. If someone started blowing up Thai planes and Thai buildings, right, and you knew who they were, the people expect the government to do something about it. Teach them a lesson. And if they didn't teach them a lesson, they want a different government, a harder government, right? Well, Russia and the French people want their government to do something. And the easiest thing for them to do is to increase bombing.
Thinking of the more aggressive airstrike of coalition against IS in Syria, is it the right direction to really fight of global terrorism? Because if you're thinking of Al-Qaeda of the 9/11, it doesn't mean the situation of terrorism has really declined. When coming to this current situation, do you think it's the right solution?
That's an interesting question. It reached the crux of the entire argument because America knew it was Afghanistan's who organised the 9/11. It wasn't Iraq. It wasn't even really Al Qaeda. It was people inside Afghanistan who did that. But America had unfinished business. George Bush Jr., father George Bush Sr., had started a war to retrieve Kuwait from Iraq. And he stopped at the border, which was great. That's what he was told to do, and that's what he did. He worked on behalf of the United Nations. They took Kuwait back, and he stopped on the border. His son believed that he had to do something more than his dad. So, under the pretext of the New York bombings, he started propaganda that there's weapons of mass destruction inside Iraq, and got a number of countries, one was UK, Italy as well, that there should be action taken. So he wanted to go into Iraq, what his father never did, and finish the business. It was him going into Iraq and making Iraq fall what started the whole lot taking off. Right? My Prime Minister followed
Tony
him.
Blair.
He followed him on mass destruction. There
Yes,
was never,
and he came out to accept later that it's false pretext.
of course. Once he learned, once it was said by the State Department, once he agreed it, he couldn't then go on TV and said, "Oh, they lied to me. They're our allies, but they lied to me." He couldn't. He was stuck. And that's in his defence. If he'd been a real Prime Minister, he would have said, "I've reconsidered." But he didn't. He went along for the ride. That has started all of this going. Okay? There was more ways to get rid of Saddam Hussein than a bombing war. But Americans like bombing wars. It does two things. It tests their new technology. It tests their logistics. It tests their air power. It tests their ground troops. It tests their infrastructure. It does all that in one go. So for them going into Iraq allowed the American army to test out all its new wonderful equipment. America's not in Syria. They've announced, as you may already know, that they're sending over special forces to Iraq and Syria, mostly to Iraq, to assist them in dislodging ISIS. Okay?
The world is not a safer place since 9/11. It's
No.
becoming having more terrorism, even spreading around with lone wolf.
But one thing you may have noticed, no one mentions Al-Qaeda anymore. Al-Qaeda. No one mentions anymore. They're like the second, they used to be the top bogeyman. Now they're down here as a bogeyman. ISIS is the bogeyman now, right? So Al-Qaeda is seen more as, okay, they're just freedom fighters. And America has been speaking to Al Qaeda.
Does it mean it's even more difficult to tackle or to solve the problem of terrorism, the so-called terrorism?
Immensely. No country has allies, none. No country has friends, and no country has enemies. Countries have needs, and what your need is today decides on who your friends are today. If your need changes tomorrow, that decides on who your friends are tomorrow, and who's your friend today can be your enemy tomorrow. That's how it's always been, and that's how it always will be. So therefore, America's enemies was Al Qaeda for 10 years. They're now seeing Al Qaeda fighting ISIS for control. So the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So they're seeing Al Qaeda as a way of dislodging ISIS. So it's a funny old world.
No true enemy, no
No
real friends.
true friends. That stands for Thailand, England, France, everybody. No one has friends, they only have needs. And if your need and your friend are the same, you can be friends forever. But sometimes your need and your friends change, and then it's no longer your friend anymore.
But in your capacity as advisor to European Union, what should European Union countries do in order to fight against terrorism nowadays?
They're going to have to set up what they don't like doing is a mutually shared database.
Share database.
Because unless you can get information from who is in the country next door, if you've got freedom of borders, you don't know what's going on. So when you get to the airport, in France, it tells you who you are, and the French have it in their database. The Germans don't get it, the British don't get it, no one gets it, unless that person does something out of the ordinary, and the French might then send over a directive that this person could be a terrorist.
Currently, there is no mechanism to share
No,
data.
no. It's only been recently that in the UK that the Treasury and the Inland Revenue shares the same database. They used to be separate. So you could get a letter from the Inland Revenue saying you owe this much tax. And you get a letter from the Treasury saying, here's some money back, you paid too much tax. Because they were separate and no one knew what was going on. It's now they're all merged. That still takes on in Europe, in Germany, because the Americans set Germany up as separate states inside Germany. If there's someone gets knocked down on a car on a road which crosses the border between two of the states, the ambulance can't come across the border from the one state, even though it's one country. They have to come from inside the area which actually owns that bit of road.
But overall, does it mean to lessen spirit of European Union because the forming or ideology of European Union is to have one single community? But now you have to be having more tighter control of the border, and that could be backlash on refugees of migration.
Germany now has set up a wide border between it and Hungary and it and Austria. Austria now has a border with Hungary. Hungary has a border with Serbia. And Ukraine, they've all got borders now, fenced in. All occurred. So the migrants are being pushed further back to Greece. And Greece will push them out into Turkey. And that's why the Turkish Prime Minister has been offered vast amounts of money and help if he can push them back into Syria. He's agreed in principle. He's also wants to be part of the EU. So far, every time he's applied, he's been told no. So Turkey's applied 20 times in the last 20 years and been told no, 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 no. He's now said, for me to help you, you've got to help me.
But is it like sending those refugees back to die because airstrike hasn't really stopped?
I just come back from a conference deciding on what refugees should be. The conference started, it was held in Germany. The conference started and it was humanitarian aid. What do we do? Hospitals, right? And then the bombing came in Paris. And we got a directive come down was control them, humanitarian comes last. So
That's human tragedy.
it is, right? So they come last. So Now, all our work which was done there is to give a direction to the European Commission on how to control its borders and how to repatriate the people who are there. It's been chaos. 3 Syrians were arrested in Colombia. They landed from Germany and arrested because their passports didn't match them. One man was carrying a passport of a woman. Being part of the migrants, less emphasis was on who they are as to what were their needs. You got baby, you need food, you need tents, you need water, right? Not on who you are. The first rule of any government is protect its citizens. To do that, you must know who comes in your country. And Europe clearly doesn't know who comes in its country. Because what they were doing was, they were saying, who's got passports? People who own passports, go over there. Those without passports, go over there. So those, the passports were put on buses to Vienna. When they got to Vienna, they said, who's got Syrian passports, who's got other passports? And they got added into blocks, Syrian, Iraqi, Pakistani, Afghan. Syrian passport, you want a bus to Munich, or Berlin, or Hamburg, or Frankfurt, or wherever. And they were put on buses just on, no one looked at the passports, right? They just saw the passports. So you had these people pouring in en masse. Immigration couldn't cope. When they got to Germany train station, they were registered. What's your name? And they said their name, what was on the passport, they told them. Most Germans don't speak Arabic. They just write it down in English form and say he's got a passport, end of story. So now he's registered.
Having seen all these scenes, some even say that it's the beginning of the end of Europe. How do you see it?
Whoa. If some stricter intervention is not done, it could become the beginning of retraction in Europe. That means going back to it being a market as opposed to a federal organisation. Because Treaty of Rome was pretty a marketplace. Its first rule in Treaty of Rome, when it started in the 60s, was free movement of labour. So skills could be moved around Europe to miss the skills that were being destroyed by war. That's its first concept, right? Schengen came later, but that was the first one. You'd have to go back to the First Amendment or first rule and say, no, free movement doesn't exist anymore. UK has already suspended free movement so that Europeans can be sent back at the airport for no reason other than they don't want them there. Up until recently, if you was European with a passport, they had to let you through. Couldn't stop you. But now, them rules are gradually being suspended. So unless something is done, it would push Europe back 10 years, maybe 20 years.
On the issue of terrorism, Southeast Asia is now being quite alert after seeing recent Paris attacks. What's your hint or what's the knowledge you have got about the risky situation of terrorism in Southeast Asia?
If I was a terrorist in Southeast Asia, which I'm not, if I was, I would straight away announce I was part of ISIS. I'd go public, we're part of ISIS. That would do 2 things. One, it would allow ISIS in at least to announce that ISIS is in Thailand or in Philippines or in China. We have control and we're getting control. 2, they will get funding from central ISIS to be more organised, more trained, better weapons. And 3rd, it will bring the country you're in into a propaganda war, because they're going to have to prove to the people who come to that country that ISIS is not here really, where they're getting seen in newspapers, ISIS in Thailand. Now, tourism in Thailand is a major issue. And if I wanted to disrupt Thailand, I would disrupt its tourism by putting a fear into tourists that if you go to Thailand, ISIS. China has a similar, Philippines has the same problem, although the Philippines have announced they're going to give autonomy to the area down by Mindanao under the umbrella of Philippines, but still autonomy. The military will still be down there, but protecting rather than attacking. But inside they can run their own affairs. China tried to do it by moving hands into Uyghur areas. So they outnumbered Uyghurs, and therefore Uyghurs would have a low voice. That was the Mao way of doing it, and it's been done ever since. All it's done is forced the Uyghurs into a tight circle, and they find the only way they can resist is by violence. And some of the violence you've already seen in Bangkok. So, although...
That's what you see is part of connection
part of connections.
Uyghur, China,
Yes,
with bombing in Bangkok.
yes. If I was Uyghurs, I would also announce I'm part of IS. And then you have this, it's 40 million Uyghurs, or 50 million Uyghurs. How many are IS? They all announce we're part of IS, the terrorists announce. China has to say, no, they're not here. And then ISIS says, yes, we are. We just bombed up a train station. We just killed 4 policemen. They can announce that, and it gets front page news everywhere. At the moment, all the civil wars taking place in Southeast Asia are low key. Most tourists do not know. You can stop tourists in the street and say, what about what's going on in the south? And they say, I don't know, the islands, beach parties, right? But if it's announced in the UK press, the French press, the American press, ISIS in Thailand, what's the effect going to be in tourism?
What should the government do to cope with the situation?
All governments, in the end, have to sit down and talk to the people they're shooting. It's happened everywhere in the war. Only 2 places it's never happened. One was in Germany in the Second World War when the Allies decided to bomb it to the ground and not have any discussions. And the second one was in Japan when the Allies decided that we're going to bomb Japan until it surrenders using atomic bombs. Other than 2 countries, every other war, even the Korean War, ended sitting down face to face. They're going to have to bite their tongues and sit down face to face with people they're trying to get rid of and work out a compromise.
And Thailand, to be thinking of the macro picture of terrorism, Thailand has to be much more careful on lone wolf attacks, individual threats.
You cannot legislate against lone wolf attacks. If someone is Thai, he gets the freedom of Thailand, but he don't get his mindset. His mindset may not be Thai. His mindset may be something else, and he may do a terrorist crime. That's always going to happen. Right? It's happened before in Thailand. I dare say it happen again in the future. In UK, we have the same problem. We have mostly Pakistanis who are Sunni, are being indoctrinated by ISIS, and they believe they must do something. They either leave to go and fight, or they become terrorists inside UK. The same inside France, the same inside other countries. America's seen this, and America now has put new laws in place that if you want to go to America now, within the next 3 or 4 weeks, there's going to be a whole new set of rules you have to abide by, and a lot more hoops you've got to jump through before they give you a visa.
Should ordinary people worry about terrorism, or should they go on about their life?
No,
as
they should
normal?
go on about their lives. Terrorism feeds on fear. If you take the fear away, then it diminishes. Because they used to say a few years ago, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. But I think that's now vanished. I think one man's terrorist is another man's terrorist now. And they will grow in power by fear. If they're not feared, then there's not a lot they can do. Not a lot they can do. And security forces in Thailand are pretty strong, pretty efficient. They know who's who. From what I know from them, they have earmarked and looked at potentials. So I'm pretty sure if you go about your business, it's the best way of defeating the terrorists.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you for
Terence
inviting me.
Sullivan for joining me เป็นการประเมินสถานการณ์ด้านความมั่นคงและการต่อสู้กับการก่อการร้ายโดยหนึ่งในที่ปรึกษาคณะกรรมาธิการสหภาพยุโรปนะคะและระบุว่าจะต้องมีความสำคัญสำหรับรัฐบาลที่จะ แลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลข่าวสารอย่างเข้มงวดมากยิ่งขึ้นเพื่อรับมือกับการก่อการร้ายค่ะและทั้งหมดคือตอบโจทย์และที่นี่ไทย PBS สำหรับคืนนี้ค่ะดิฉันณัฐฐา โกมลวาทินสวัสดีค่ะ